in the House, 100 in the Senate, from the best down to the worst. If you take the best folks we have in the House, from 100%ers down to 0%ers, I can't fit them all on the screen, obviously, but I'm just starting with 100%ers and going down. So we're looking at 100%. It's a strange thing. If I will take all of the members of the House and I'll bump their voting record up against National Right to Life voting record, it is a 1-to-1 correlation. If you're right on the life issue, you'll be right on the economic issue. Those who are wrong on economic issues, you'll find that they're also totally wrong on life issues. If you're about 23% pro-life, you'll be about 23% good on economic issues. If you're about 76% pro-life, you'll be about 76% good on economic issues. Actually, when I helped run the Republican Party in Texas, we were able to take this to our business groups, chambers of commerce, small businesses, that we don't care a whit about moral issues. Say, good, you don't need to, but you do need to know the people who vote the best on your issues are social conservatives, and that if you don't get someone who's right on life, you will not get someone who supports your issues on taxation and regulation or reducing of taxes and everything. They go hand in hand. It makes perfect sense, because if someone will not protect your life, why not they protect your money?
That's right.
Money's a whole lot more important than your life. Your life's a whole lot more important than your money. So that's the third position that we have, is right to life. Doesn't matter whether it's social issues, economic issues. It all goes back to the fact that government exists to protect the inalienable rights, the first of which is the right to life. The fourth thing that you find from the Declaration says, "And to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature, nature's God, entitles him." Now, this doesn't mean much to us today, but to these guys it said there is a fixed moral law, an immutable moral law. It was based around these words, the laws of nature, nature's God. That came out of the most famous law book of the day. Every American knew that. That phrase, the laws of nature, nature's God, came out of Blackstone's Commentaries on Law. Thomas Jefferson said that attorneys studied Blackstone's the same way that Muslims studied the Quran. If you're an American attorney, you know that phrase. There's 2 chapters dedicated to it in Blackstone's. You go to volume 1 of the 4 volumes. Chapter 2, it's all about this. Now, if you just take the laws of nature, and by the way, Blackstone explains that this is nothing more than what you see in Romans 1 and in Psalms 19. Romans 1 and Psalms, people come at Christians a lot and say, how can you guys say you have a loving and just God when he would send people to hell in Africa who have never heard the gospel? What is the answer to that? The answer to that is Romans 1, where Paul says everything that can be known about God, including the intricacies of the Godhead, can be known through what he has created, so that even the heathen are without excuse. Now, what the Scripture just says is God has given a complete revelation of himself through nature. The problem is we're not an agrarian community anymore. I'm still a cowboy. I still have the ranch. I still got the horses, the cows, everything. And when you spend time in the country, you have a different perspective on a lot of things than people who live in urban areas and cities. See nothing but concrete a whole lot. It's very different. So if you take the laws of nature, I can tell you, without I don't need the Bible at all to tell you that there is a natural law of self-defense. I ride horses all the time. I got great trail horses, and a great trail horse means if I tell my mare to go off the side of that cliff and follow that goat trail down that cliff face, she's going to do it. If I tell my mare I need her to swim a river, she'll swim it. I got to have a horse that I can trust that will do what I want and do when I want it. And we have a very good trust. Well, this mare, keep her in a barn, feed her all the time. She recently had a young foal, and I go into that barn to take care of her and feed her. I'll come out with a hoof print in the middle of my forehead. Something kicks into her that says, you do not get near my young. She's got a mechanism of self-defense that says, I will defend my home. You get out of my barn. It's not your barn. I gave you the barn. I gave you the feed. Yeah, but she thinks it's her home. She will chase you out of that home. She will chase you away from her young. I raise lambs as well, raise sheep. We had a ewe, great ewe. She and our cat kind of bonded up. And at night, when the ewe lies down, the cat will go snuggle up against that wall, and they sleep together. And so the lamb watches out for the cat until that ewe last week had twins. And that cat went out to do what the cat always does, and that cat got pounded in the ground by that ewe. It's a whole different mentality. You do not come near my young. You do not come near my turf. See, you can pass all the laws you want to make it illegal for horses to kick you in the head. It won't matter. It's a natural law of self-defense that God has put in them. I don't need any other civil law to tell me that's natural law. Same thing with liberty. You know, elk don't enslave raccoons, and deer don't enslave possums. There's 10 million species in nature. Liberty is natural. Well, why didn't the Founding Fathers follow that? See, that's the problem we have with public education today. We're told about the pro-slavery Founding Fathers. We never hear about the 70% who were hardcore abolitionists. And those 70% said it violates the laws of nature to have slavery. You can't point to any species in nature that it doesn't exist. Same thing with abortion. I don't care whether you believe in evolution or creation. There is no species in nature that kills its young still in the womb. violates all process, evolutionary, or created either one. The same thing with homosexuality. You will find occasional 2 or 3 species out of 10 million have it occasionally, but it's always an aberration. There's nothing natural. It's against the law of nature. That's why the American law books called homosexuality a crime against nature. It wasn't a crime against the Bible, it was a crime against nature. You also have the same thing with property. Every animal, when it's born, will stake out what it believes, but it doesn't matter if it's a snake or a rat or a mouse or a raccoon, it will stake out what it believes to be its property and will defend that property. It does have property. Now, if you look in the laws of nature as well, you'll also find, what's nature tell us about theft? Well, unfortunately, it's very common in nature. My horses, I got several horses, one horse will go take the food from another horse if it has the opportunity, happy to steal food from another horse. What does it tell us about adultery? Adultery is very common in nature. That's why we have 1 bull for every 40 cows. Monogamy is not a common part of nature. Adultery is. How about murder? Murder happens all the time. You ever doubt that? Just see what a skunk does inside a hen house. It will tear chickens apart, not because it eats them, but because it likes to kill them. You have the same thing with incest. Incest is very common, and it's one of the laws of nature. How do we know that? That's why a cowboy will not ride a Mustang. Mustangs have been bred for so many generations. They have no stamina, no strength. We don't use them. Well, my gosh, if you're saying the laws of nature establishes all this, what do you do with all this down here? That's part of the laws of nature. Yeah, but this is where you get the laws of nature's God. This is where God came in and said, look, you're not getting this. Let me help you. Let me just tell you right up front, you don't commit adultery. Let me tell you, you don't murder. Let me tell you, you don't steal. See, the laws of nature and the laws of nature's God, those are those 2 phrases that go together. And the laws of nature and the laws of nature's God, that's what we find in the Scriptures, and that's what became the 7th Amendment of the Constitution. That's why all the legal sources back then said Christianity is part of the common law, part of the 7th Amendment, because it establishes the rights and wrongs. That's why theft is out. That's why rape is out. That's why all these other things are out, because we, either from the laws of nature or the laws of nature's God, we know they're wrong. So that's where we get that there is a fixed moral law. The 5th and final point we have in this is that governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Here's where we get the philosophy of the consent of the governed. Now, George Washington, who led the Federalist Party, said very clearly, he says, the fundamental principle of our Constitution requires that the will of the majority shall prevail. That's it. That's why a filibuster is wrong. That's why they did not support a filibuster, because it gives the minority more power than the majority. In the Senate to this day, 40 can beat 60 every time it happens. Ain't supposed to be. The fundamental principle of our Constitution requires the will of the majority shall prevail. We don't have the current fundamental filibuster we have in the Senate now until 1972. It's not a founding father's innovation at all. It is a very modern innovation the way we do it. We'll also have Jefferson, who led the Anti-Federalist Party. He says, the will of the majority is the natural law of every society and the only sure guardian of the rights of man. Both parties agreed, will of the majority. That's it. Now, the will of the majority, what's significant is, notice where they said that. It doesn't come up top. It comes after you've established inalienable rights and after you've established a moral law. Then you can have the will of the majority. So the majority is not allowed to vote on whether you're going to repeal an inalienable right or whether you're going to repeal a moral law. That's why marriage is out of balance for government, because that's defined by God in Genesis 1 through 8. Genesis 1 through 3, God says one man, one woman, they got a family, not good. He said everything else is good. He said this is very good. Jesus over in Matthew 19 says, don't you remember how God did it at the beginning? He has one man, one woman in a lifelong union. What God has joined together, let not man put asunder. So that was an inalienable right. It came in Genesis 1 through 8. That's why civil law thereafter recognized what God had done. So it was all about that. So if we have a vote that 93.7% of the nation on a referendum says rape is no longer a crime, sorry, it will still be a crime in America, because we have a fixed moral law, the laws of nature, nature's God. You see, what we can do with the consent of the governed is what are called social compact laws. We can vote and decide whether the sidewalk should be 4 feet, 5 feet, or 6 feet wide. We can decide whether the speed limit should be 45, 55, 65, or if you're in Texas, 85 miles an hour. You can decide all that kind of stuff. That's fine, because that does not deal with moral rights. It does not deal with inalienable rights. Now, if you look at the 5 things that we have here, there is a divine creator. In the Declaration, 126 words, there's a divine creator. Inalienable rights come from God. Government exists to protect God-given inalienable rights. There is a fixed moral law that comes from the creator. And 5, the consent of the government. Notice that 4 out of the 5 are God-centered, which is why you can never have a secular government that will be a limited government, ever. Because if you ignore God, then you've ignored there is a God who gives certain rights that are not to be touched by government. Government exists to protect those rights, and there's a fixed moral law. If you get secular, then you'll start voting on all sorts of moral issues. You'll start voting on what rights you can and can't have, whether the right to keep and bear arms is actually a right, whether the right to have a conscience is actually, see, we've got that case on Tuesday. We'll discuss on Tuesday at the U.S. Supreme Court whether we can have a religious conscience or not. The Supreme Court will tell us whether we can. We've already had a case decided, a case argued this year about whether we will anymore allow a public mention of God in public. The city of Greece. We've had invocations for 400 years. Well, we're deciding now whether we might think it's time to stop mentioning God publicly at all. The Supreme Court gets to decide that kind of stuff only if you have a secular government. See, you cannot find a secular government that's a limited government. You can try France, you can try Greece, you can try Spain or Portugal, you can't try Chile, you can't try Cuba. If you name any secular government in the world, you will not find a limited government. A limited government exists only when you recognize there are things that government cannot touch, and that comes from God. So I'll close with this statement from Thomas Jefferson. It came from a book he wrote in 1781. It is inscribed inside the Jefferson Memorial to this day. This is what our least religious founding father told us. Can the liberties of a nation be thought secure when removed their only firm basis? Now, according to our least religious founding father, what is the only firm basis of national liberties? According to our least religious founding father, the only firm basis of national liberties is a conviction, notice the word conviction, is a conviction in the minds of the people that these liberties are the gift of God, that they are not to be violated but with His wrath. He said, indeed, I tremble for my country, and I reflect that God is just, and His justice can't sleep forever. The only way you preserve national liberties is people have to have a conviction in their minds that they came from God, that if you start screwing around with them, you're going to tick Him off, and then we're all going to be in trouble. That's the only way the nation stays secure. So those are the 5 principles that produce American exceptionalism. Forgive me for running out. I got to get upstairs and get set up, but that's what I wanted to leave you with as a foundation.